Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So I want to apologize for the lack of content lately. I have been under the weather, took a week off for Thanksgiving, was out of town for that, and then got sick and lost my voice. And as a YouTube creator that needs their voice to do any videos, I was out of work for 2 weeks with literally no voice. So thankfully I've recovered from that. But as soon as my voice recovered, my hard drive at the store crashed. So I've been out with it without a computer to create videos on. I'm finally doing it here at home on my secondary computer. Hopefully the audio and the video is okay and we can get to some more videos. I'll get that computer fixed up here in shortly and we'll be back on track at the start of the year, if not sooner than that. So before we get talking about the Pioneer ban announcement today, I want to talk about just the entire Magic the Gathering market as a whole. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a massive decrease in Magic the Gathering across the board, whether it be singles, and even the sealed market. Something happened around War of the Spark. Now, I have a few theories about why we're starting to see a massive price decrease since War of the Spark, and I'll get into that more in depth in another video over at my market channel over at the Rogue Market. If you're not subscribed to that, I highly suggest you do head over there and subscribe. It's actually outperforming this channel. I'm getting more views and more subscribers on that channel, and so the energy is definitely there rather than here. But anyway, but it's not just staples, and I'm going to show some evidence for that on that video that it really indicates that we're having a very weak Magic Gathering scene across the board, and it's a culmination of things. I think we saw a decrease in player base. You can see that with like Twitch numbers and just GP attendance and WPN attendance. They track all of those sort of things, and all of those have been way down since War of the Spark. But there's also what I call overwhaling, which I think was the closest put out too many premier products within the past few months, from Secret Lairs to Collector's Editions to Brawl decks to announcing more products with every set and more layer decks that are coming out in January. I think that this has also had a huge impact on not only the sealed market, but also the secondary singles market for Magic the Gathering. And if you actually come over here and check out like the modern staples here at MG Goldfish, these little bumps here are when MG Goldfish readjusts. They usually have a set number of cards, between like 350 cards that they put in this modern staples. So you can't like compare this day, oh, what happened here? We had a huge price increase. No, here's they just had a different list. And so we can take the last list here of modern staples from 4,500 this would be back in October, and we've already lost down to about $4,000 worth of the same cards. So there's a couple reasons for this. For Modern got cannibalized, of course, by Pioneer. Pioneer is the new shiny format that everyone wants to play. But it's not just Modern, it's Legacy. If we actually do the same thing with Legacy, look at the Legacy price. It is down substantially since War of the Spark, really getting hit hard right now in the latter part of December. And if we actually go over to the reserve list has been hit pretty hard too since War of the Spark. We've had a massive decrease on the reserve list. And you can actually look at sealed prices, like things have been sold at eBay. eBay usually has a weekly price of like a booster box of Ultimate Masters that is sold. Those are down quite substantially. The one that was hit the hardest is Modern Horizons, which was a set that it was doing quite well. And the value of Modern Horizon plus the sealed purchase price of Modern Horizons are way down from the height of Modern Horizons. So let me just give you a little bit of history of my involvement with Magic the Gathering finance. So I have been really involved with it, I would say, since 2012. 2012, when I got back into Magic, wanted to play competitively, and realized right off the bat that you have to be finance savvy unless you're rich, basically. So I worked just a regular $15 an hour job like most people did at that time period. I drove a forklift, and I couldn't afford to play Magic competitively. And that's why I started getting into MG Finance, especially in the trading aspect of it, the managing the collection. And that's what my channel is more geared towards, is people that are invested a couple $1,000s or more into Magic the Gathering and don't want to see their investment collapse. And so you are involved in buying, selling, trading just to manage a healthy collection, and so you don't have to basically break the bank to play Magic the Gathering. Then I got involved in a few stores, and now I do own my own local game store. So I've always been trying to be on top of the Magic the Gathering trends. And back during, I would say, 2012 to 2015, 16, we saw pretty familiar trends yearly, so quarterly, yearly, seasonally. And seasonally, especially at this time period around the Christmas time, you usually saw about a 10 to 15% decrease in Magic the Gathering singles. And how that used to factor in is because people would cannibalize their Magic the Gathering cards for Christmas to buy sealed product. Usually that's when Magic released their best sealed products, was around Christmas season, as well as just to get gifts for other people. And we saw kind of a lull in Magic the Gathering singles around Christmas, but it wasn't as substantial as we've seen this year. But then something interesting happened about 2017, where we saw Christmas seasons actually be, buying sprees a lot of times for Magic the Gathering singles. So if we come back here, like December, it did fall. This December it does look for Karn, but that just got a reprint there, so we can't adjust it. But you can look back at some card singles, and you actually see gains during December for staples and especially Commander. And those were years where I assume that maybe the Magic the Gathering singles market was being used as Christmas presents, and that's why we had these bull markets during the Christmas season. And recently, we have been seeing massive gains in the tax return season. So last year and the year before were huge gains in the January through April. When everyone got their tax returns, that's when the single markets were the height. So that's what we really need to analyze right now. And like I said, I'll be doing this more on my second channel over at the Rogue Market, looking at all the indicators to see if we think that Magic the Gathering will recover in 2020 during the tax season when people get their tax returns and splurge on Magic cards. If that's the case, we need to find these bottoms. We need to find when the modern staples, the legacy staples, the reserve list staples, the commander staples hit their all-time bottom, and then that is the time to probably buy back in. However, if it is going to be a weak year, I don't think that it will be a good time to invest in Magic. Magic, unfortunately, is turning the way of Pokemon. What I mean by that is Pokemon has been notorious of releasing like tins and collector's products and just box sets with every set, and it really decreases the price of your average single, and it has a hard time for those cards ever to recover after that. So Wizard of the Coast has been kind of cutting out the middleman, selling directly to consumer with these products like Secret Layers and Collector's Editions and whatnot. And I think it's finally starting to have a huge toll on the Magic the Gathering economy. So that's kind of the million-dollar question: is Magic going to have another resurgence? Can we see another War of the Spark? Where we have a massive increase in the player base. We have one of the best pre-release attendance of all times, that in Dominaria, and we can get this robust Magic the Gathering scene again. There are a lot of other factors like digital cutting into singles prices and whatnot. And those are all questions I think that we should be exploring. So again, I think that it's a culmination of things between overwhaling of the premier products as well as a decrease in player base, which are both not good signs for the Magic the Gathering economy. Anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand for the Market Monday, which is the Pioneer ban list today. So today we saw Oko Thief of Crowns and Nexus of Fate banned, and they come at no surprise to me. In fact, when you look at the explanation that both these decks had about a 60% win rate, you never want to see that in Magic. Anything above a 50% is really going to start causing the format to lead towards that deck. So 60% is very, very significant as far as statistics are concerned. And again, this is no surprise to me because the last ban list had Smuggler's Copter and Once Upon a Time. And if you actually look at the non-Smuggler Copters decks, the decks that were doing very well, that also had the high win percentage, the 7 and 2 and betters, were all Oko Thief of Crowns decks. Usually instead of Smuggler's Copter, they were using Heart of Koran because of the synergy between the two was just very good. So Oko Thief of Crowns, I've said it before, this card was going to get banned in Pioneer. All roads lead to Oko. It actually had a very good week 1 showing, had a good week 2, but it was never over the top of needing a ban. I mean, they tried with the week 1 with banning the Oath of Nissa to keep Oko down. Oko was involved in that deck, but now we are definitely seeing Simic food, and we actually saw week 1 too. Oko Thief of Crowns had a huge representation in the mono green, or actually it was Sultai ramp that was running the ley line. So I would even suggest that maybe Oko was the problem in many of those decks to begin with, and now they're finally just realizing. I think they didn't want another one of their premier cards from from Throne of the Eldraine to get banned in another format. This card has now been banned in basically every format. Now it's still legal in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, but it has a huge representation in all of those formats. So it comes to no surprise that Oko is gone in Pioneer. Next of Fate is a card that is very debatable because I don't know that it's been around or dominated enough in Pioneer to be deserving of a ban, but I think Nexus of Fate falls in the same category as something like Smuggler's Copter. This is a card that you have to analyze and say, okay, is it necessarily broken or you can't deal with it or whatnot? Or does it lead to just bad game states or just a bad overall environment? So I like this sort of theory that Pioneer is having right now, that if you look at a card and you can decide whether or not is this card good, is this a net good or a net bad for the format? And cards like Nexus of Fate and Smuggler's Copter, I think, push out more than they actually allow in the format. So instead of going a different win condition, you can just go Nexus of Fate looping. Instead of going a different value-based creature, you can just go Smuggler's Copter. So for diversity's sake, for just an overall health of the game, and just the annoying factor of cards like Nexus of Fate, the unfun, quote-unquote, factor, I think is a good idea to axe these type of cards when they do start to have the dominance that they do have. So I'm glad to see Nexus of Fate go. I'm glad to see Oko Thief of Crowns go. And I will most likely open up Pioneer once again. So we can take a look at the Pioneer format over here. And you can see it was Simic Ramp and even this green-blue Stompy. This is a horrible sign when mono green Stompy is running Oko Thief of Crowns. So typically these type of decks have run, this actually is more of a food than a Stompy list, but I mean, it is going heavy on like the Steel Leaf Champions rather than going on the, when you think of like the food ramp, you're thinking of other cards that they have the potential, like the Voracious Hydra or the Hydroid Krasis that used to be the top end. This is like your classic mono green Stompy with Galta, Steel Leaf Champions, and then ramping them with Elvish Mystics. So they decided to kind of hybrid the two decks and throw Oko Thief of Crowns. You can dumb down your opponent's Galtas into 3/3 Elks or whatever. Gives you the edge of whoever draws the most Okos tends to win the game of these particular mirror matchups or other similar matchups, these mid-range type matchups. Simic Ramp, very similar list, but this one is going into the Hydroid Krasises and typically, yeah, it curves out a lot lower than this one that does have the Nissa Shakes the World. So you can see that this is almost the standard deck that had to get banned. Nissa, yeah, ramping the Walking Ballista, that sounds pretty dirty. And with Oko to stall you there, it seems like all roads inevitably lead to Oko. But it was beyond that we actually looked through the Pioneer League. We can actually expand a bunch of these decks, and Oko was in so many decks that it didn't even it's in 20% of all decks here. But what was it? I saw one in a teamer deck that was basically only card in it was Oko that they're splashing for, Gilded Goose and Oko in a teamer deck. And the worst culprit was when I saw Oko in a hexproof deck. So Oko Thief of Crowns in an All That Glitters deck it was the only splash blue card again in the entire deck was Oko Thief of Crowns. You know you have a problem. Here's a Collected Company deck running Oko in the mix. So this is a deck that existed, a very dominant deck during Standard, that now splashes Oko, even though it can't get hit off of the Coco. You can just scroll down. You can see that many decks that Oko seems very out of place. Here's the hexproof deck with the Glade Cover Scout, Basara Tower Archer, and Oko. It does have the synergy with, I guess, All the Glitters, but again, it's just dumbing down your opponent's creatures so that your hexproof creature get better and better versus the mix. So you can tell that Oko probably, yes, did need to go. That eventually most of these decks were just going to keep playing Oko-based strategies. So where does this leave us with Pioneer? I think that Pioneer gets a lot more reasonable with both the aggro decks and the control decks with Oko deck out of the way. If we actually look over here at the metagame for the Pioneer format, I think that the decks like Dredge are going to get a lot better because I think that blue-white control type decks are going to get much stronger. So Dredge typically does well against certain variants of blue-white control. This could also lead to cards that are graveyard hates, like Rest in Peace going up because of Dredge getting more of a share, or more of the graveyard-based decks getting a share. I think it gives Phoenix a huge nudge too, because one of Phoenix's worst matchup were these Oko-based decks. Getting one of your Phoenixes turned into a 3/3 is definitely a feels bad scenario. It's very hard to come back from that. Decks like Mono Black Aggro could also have a resurgence because this is also one of the bad matchups, was not only the green Stompy or the green Ramp getting cards out that are just bigger than yours on curve, but then having the ability to just continue to apply that pressure and not being able to go underneath them. Now without Oko out of the mix, maybe Mono Black Aggro will have a chance to shine, and some of these other decks will have a chance to shine too. So it should mix things up quite reasonably in the Pioneer format. The decks that have been performing well in the format, we can take a look at some of these other cards that have been performing in an Oko-based format. You can see there's a lot of Throne of Eldraine cards like the Bone Crusher Giant, and we also do have the Murderous Rider and even the Brazen Borrower that have been performing extremely well in the Pioneer format. So that actually makes me think that Throne of Eldraine boxes are not a lost cause. You still do have Oko that should hold some price. It's definitely going to get crushed now without Pioneer, which is arguably the most popular format currently, or at least the most popular format as far as price is concerned, at least affecting the Magic the Gathering price. But Throne of Eldraine as a whole still seems pretty good with cards like Murderous Riders and the Bone Crusher Giants and Brazen Borrowers and Gilded Gooses still being very represented in the meta. Now, Gilded Goose does get a lot worse without Oko, but we've seen Standard actually adjust to other food-based strategies, and where Gilded Goose is having a lot more success in Standard than it did right after the Oko banning in Standard. If we look at this too, we see that different spirits-based strategies are doing well in the form of both the Bant companies and the Bant spirits. The Spell Queller seems to be playing a lot of lists have been successful with Spell Queller. There's also Azorius Tempo strategies that are going good. Looks like Collected Company, though, is very, very well positioned now in this meta. If we look down here, a lot of mono black strategies were able to push through. A lot of the Izzet Tempo and Phoenix strategies also were able to push through at least as 5-0s. We still have the Hardened Scales. We still have mono green Stompies. We still have various dredge decks and aggro-based decks. There's even a budget aggro-based deck here we can look at. And overall, I think that the format is still quite healthy. We still need to nip a couple cards in the bud. And if I were to give some predictions of cards that may not be able to survive in the Pioneer format, I'd put the 4 cards on my watch list today of being Collected Company, Rally the Ancestors, just because both of those were able to be broken in Standard formats in yesteryears. And then I'd also put Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time still on that list. I know that currently neither of those cards are really that represent the meta. I would say Dig Through Time is represented more than Treasure Cruise, and the Treasure Cruise oftentimes can be a liability. But with the more cards printed, I don't think it's really safe to put your stakes on any card that absolutely has to be running Treasure Cruise, as that is a card that tends to get banned in various formats with lots of like cantrip type spells or ways to fill up the graveyard. So Phoenix, again, this card deck I think should have a resurgence now with Oko out of the mix. You can look at Thing of the Ice might start to get more of a share. Cards like Fatal Push and Thoughtseize now again become even better. That they were typically, Fatal Push was quite weak versus the Simic decks, as it didn't really take care of all the threats usually on curve sometimes, and it just got kind of awkward when the green decks were just doing something better than the black decks. Same thing with like Thoughtseize. If you rip stuff out, the value-based decks of Simic Ramp and Simic Stompy tended to outproduce the black decks. So I think that black decks do get a lot better. I think the Phoenix decks get a lot better. These typical decks do very well against Control. Control should have a resurgence too, because it was miserable Control to play against Hydroid Krasis and Oko. So Control should also rebound quite quickly. So those are the type of cards that I'd look to for possible investments. We could see Arclight Phoenix possibly rebound. This is just still struggling from a lot of supply. This was in the Challenger decks. It's going to be hard for this ever to recover, but it typically does recover when it does start to see a lot of the meta share. Week 1, Arclight Phoenix was one of the decks that did see a lot of that meta share. And there are other Phoenix decks. This is the Phoenixes, the Flamelight Phoenix 3 Kindling Phoenix. There's another card I think gets a lot better with the Oko ban, because it does have the ability just to continue to pack the heat with recurring Phoenixes and cards like Elder Deep Fiend to tap down. This is another deck that tended to suffer versus the Simic-based decks because of just the value and the 1-2 punch of either the value threat of being grounded out, so basically 2-for-1ing your opponent with every one of the removal spells, with leading things behind with like Nissa that leaves back a 3/3 threat every time, or Wicked Wolf taking care of a card and then leaving back a potentially lethal threat within a few turns, or Questing Beast getting in there for the hasty damage, versus things like the Phoenix decks just seem to be a step behind. Now, though, this does seem to be a good deck versus other aggro and mid-range strategies, with being able to Bone Crusher Giant and Brazen Borrower away things, and then just have the potential lethal with a Flash and Elder Deep Fiend, a Rekindling Phoenix coming back, and the Flaming Phoenix is coming back from the graveyard. So I actually do like these cards in this particular deck. Cards like Flaming Phoenixes did have printings beyond just their standard printings. They were in, I believe, the intro packs at the time period. But cards like Bone Crusher Giant continue to look very good investments in the long term. Eventually, Throne of the Eldraine is going to lose the spotlight to Theros coming out, and that's when we're going to see cards that are seeing a lot of play in Standard and in now this Pioneer format have the ability to accrue value. The problem with these particular adventure-based cards is I do believe that their rarity is not quite a rare. With the ability of this to have the showcase art of or I don't think it's showcase, the adventure art, whatever they call the adventure art, these do show up more than your average rare in the set. So Bone Crusher Giants, Brazen Borrowers, Murderous Riders, even though they're seeing a lot of play, you got to kind of think of them in between a rarity, between an uncommon and a rare. However, I do think a card like this that does see this much play and throughout tons of formats, even Legacy, does have the ability to go up in value from this really flat price. So that's one that I definitely pick from this Phoenix's deck. The Bone Crusher Giant, the Brazen Borrower had already gone up quite a bit. And you can actually look at some of these other cards like Champion of Wits and the Rekindling Phoenix and Elder Deep Fiend to have even more potential price increase. One of them that's very interesting is this Kozilek's Return. It has gone up to about $5, but if this deck and other decks that do use Kozilek's Return start to dominate, I definitely take another look at Kozilek's Return for another double up. Let's just look at a few other decks here. We are starting to see a lot more of these budget red decks. These are very, very good decks in the meta. I think Castle Embereth gives us another 1-2 punch where you can, any even one drop that gets left over can be a threat with being turned into a 2-1. If there's a couple of them left, they can actually be short work with Castle Embereth activations. Stoke the Flames I knew would find a place in Pioneer. It was a very, very good card in Frontier for a long period of time. This was a deck, this kind of Goblins-based deck that did exist and did do very well in the Frontier format. And again, I think that a lot of the roads have been leading to what Pioneer had already, or Frontier had already figured out. So I'm wondering if Siege Rhino will find a place in this format. Siege Rhino has been quite awkward. And again, it just hasn't been able to really do anything against the ramp-based strategies or these wilderness reclamation-based strategies. It was actually too slow when the Smuggler's Copter aggro decks are around there. But if we do have a slower aggro-based format where these red decks do start to beat up, or these mono-black decks do, it might actually have a environment where Siege Rhino is actually pretty good. So keep your eye on that card as well. So I'm not going to get too into detail with the Rogue Market this week. I do have to get some work done, but definitely check out my other Rogue Market channel where I will go in depth about the overall health of the game and health of the market, and it is looking pretty dire. I don't want to say that. I know I've been the boy who cries wolf in times of the past. I thought at the beginning of 2018 we were headed to some dire straits. I think I even made a prediction in 2017 that we were heading into a kind of a bear market, and both of those ended up being false. This one, though, these indicators that the collapse in most of the staples, especially Commander, that is the huge warning sign. Is Commander is just the cards like Anointed Processions or Dictate of Erebos or Cyclonic Rifts or things that have typically had these wonderful. So let's just take a look at Dictate. I love to talk about this card because this card just had that trajectory. This perfect. You might say there was some price correction from here to here with Dictate of Erebos. So with War of the Spark, it just went way up from Ultimate Masters being printing, and this is just price correction. And if you actually follow this trajectory, this is where it should be, is from $8 to about $8.10. But if you actually look in that time period, it went all the way from $5 to about $7.50. So we should be looking about $9 for a card from Dictate of Erebos. So even with the price correction here, this is where it should be today, rather than down even more down. And then we even see this with like Anointed Processions. This one had a lot of cards that actually synergized with Anointed Processions come out, and this card's also had a huge lull since the Throne of Eldraine, especially. So it has gone up since War of the Spark, but you expect this card to continue just to go up, especially with the cards, a Brawl deck that wanted it, a Commander deck that wanted it being printed would cause a huge price increase of Anointed Procession. So yeah, just really concerning things. I think Cyclonic Rift also saw a decrease. I could be wrong here though, and this is a card that does see a little bit of play in Pioneer. Yeah, it's been stagnated and gone down since War of the Sparks. You can see this card has just gone up, 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 up. I think I had a reprint right here, and then continued to rebound, and now we've just seen this card just level off and actually fall since the War of the Spark time period. So Commander, if this is happening, Commander, the bread and butter, the best format, because you don't see these big price spikes and price declines and price adjustments, because it's just like it's real world growth. What you see in Modern is if a deck does good week one, then all the speculators buy it, or at a tournament, all the speculators just buy it out and see these massive price increases. Then, of course, you see the price adjustment to where the real market price is. Commander I've always liked because it's just had this steady increase with real demand, and it gives an overall better gauge of the market. So this is a very, very concerning sign with one of the most evergreen cards in the format, which is Cyclonic Rift. So anyway, yeah, we'll talk about this more. We'll take a look at it more and maybe give a better diagnosis or outlook of what the market will be in the 29 or end of 2019, early 2020 season. Anyway, this has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to click that bell to get the notifications, and like and subscribe, and go and check that Rogue Market channel out. Thanks for watching.